Shalom, and welcome to Keeping the Shul Lights On, a podcast about the challenges of operating a synagogue, creating a Jewish community, and the hard work and efforts of a congregation's executive director and Jewish organizational leadership. Brought to you by Shul Marketing. Concerned your congregation and community are not responding to your Shul Marketing? Discover the strategies to connect with them, reach them where they are, and develop the results your leadership is seeking. Here is your host, Howard Walpoff.
Welcome back to Keeping the Shul Lights On. I'm Howard Walpoff, your host. Again, this is brought to you by Shul Marketing. And I'm very excited about this conversation because there's a lot to unfold with the experience that my guest has in her previous experiences, in her experience now, in what has been developing, will be developing within her experience now as executive director of a synagogue in California. And it's quite a journey that she is on in making sure all of these pieces really help a thriving Jewish community thrive even more and even more together. And we'll go into that as this conversation goes on. My guest is Sheila Goldman. She is the executive director of Shomrei Torah Synagogue in West Hills, California. And Sheila, welcome to our conversation today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, I'm excited to really jump into this. We obviously were speaking before we started the recording, and there's a lot going on within your congregation that we're going to get into. I don't want to jump too fast into it, but why don't you start sharing with us what sparked you into wanting to work within the Jewish community, and how did you get that start?
I've always been engaged in the Jewish community from the time I was a child. My parents were active in their small community in Lakewood, California. I was bat mitzvahed. I was very active in the Long Beach Jewish Community Center. When my husband and I got married, we joined a synagogue, even though we had no children, because it was just part of our DNA, both of ours, to be involved in Jewish life. And was involved in the synagogue that actually, the synagogue in which I work now as a member for 27 years. I was part of the core people who did the capital campaign. So I did a lot of fundraising. I was on the executive committee. I held board positions for years. I was lucky enough to get a job at Milton Community Schools in Los Angeles. And I was the assistant to the head of school there for many years. And my job morphed into being the director of community engagement, where I had the opportunity to work with wonderful, wonderful volunteers. And we really worked to make the Jewish school really a place that kids would want to come and parents would want to come. And it was just very rewarding. I received an invitation to apply for a job as the executive director of Shomrei Torah Synagogue. And it came sort of out of left field because I had been a member there and had left to join a Reform synagogue. But I interviewed for the position and it felt like I was going home. So it was a great fit. And I've been with them for 4 years. I've had just a wonderful career. It's a wonderful job. And I'm really quite happy there.
Well, it's great when you have that type of continuity within your career within the Jewish community, and having that experience previously with the school. Really, you worked a lot on community in specific because of, again, trying to nurture an attendance of families and kids that want to be there. And that really helps create an environment that people want to be at, which translates very well into how you operate a synagogue.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's really important as the executive director that you are the face to the community. The members of our synagogue know they can pick up the phone and they can call me. Most of them have my cell number. I'm always available to them. I learn things about members that oftentimes other people don't know. And I'm able to share a lot of that with our rabbi. And it's most important to us that every member feels at home and cared for in our synagogue.
Now, you bring something up that is very important because as executive director, you have a lot of different roles, some of them administrative, some of them marketing, some of them operational, some of them financial. I can keep on going with the list like that, but all of it is interpersonal. And you really are the director of human relations in many ways, and you are dealing with situations similar but not exact as the rabbi, but you're dealing with sensitive issues with finances, with relationship issues, with life cycle events. So you really are creating a lot of different level relationships with these members so that you're able to address each of these situations sensitively for them, but also administratively for the congregation.
You know, Howard, you bring something up that's really important. I think one of the most important things the executive director does in any organization is sets the tone for the staff. And when I came in, I told my staff, you're going to have a heck of a lot of fun because I only work in places that are fun. And you are going to put every member of our synagogue at the forefront of every decision you make and everything you do. And when I have, you know, sometimes a staff member will come in and they'll push back on me or something. And I always try to reframe the conversation that how will our members perceive what the decision is that we're making? And I think that's really important. I remind my staff all the time that we're here because they pay our salaries. And sometimes it can be a little frustrating because, you know, members can be a little cranky, they can be a little demanding, but at the end of the day, they support us. So we have to support them. And I think that's part of driving home a mission of how you want to be perceived in your synagogue community.
I think the word support is really important here because they're not joining a country club. While there is food, because there always has to be food, it's not a food service situation. It's not a recreational situation in the communal country club setting, but it really is. There's a lot of emotional sensitivities to why people are members of a synagogue, what types of activities they go to. Do they come to services only twice a year? Do they come 4 times a year just for Yisker? It's a lot of it has to do with their emotional state, and the way you interact with them, the way the staff interacts with them is very important, taking that very seriously from the get-go.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think the other thing that's really important is to have a really open and honest relationship with your rabbi. And when I came to work with and I, you know, partnering with Rabbi Richard Camrus, who, by the way, I was on the committee that hired him 24 years ago. So he and I sat down and I said to him, I said, Richard, in public, we have to be a united front. We have to say the same thing. We have to agree. What happens behind the scene, you and I could have lots of heartfelt conversations in disagreement, but we have to provide a united front that he's got my back and I've got his back. And that's really, really worked well. I consider him just one of the greatest thought partners. We problem solve. We help each other with our writing. I look over things that he writes before he does it. I don't typically will not send something out that has a high degree of emotion to it unless I vet it with him first and I get feedback. And it's really, it's so important to have that kind of relationship with your rabbi.
It definitely is, because the two of these roles are so important to the way the synagogue operates and how people interact with them, and the visual leaders. Although the rabbi stands out more because there are some executive directors who do try to stand 2 or 3 steps back purposely to not be in that limelight. But it's also the balance of a third angle with that being the president of the board, because it's not just a organization run by leadership; it's run by lay leaders who play an active role in developing a board and making decisions for the congregation as well, in connection with the executive director and the rabbi, with the expectation of that being implemented.
Absolutely, you're absolutely right. And I've been very lucky. I've had 2 board presidents since I've been here, and they have obviously had different styles, but both have been very supportive and have empowered me to do my job.
Which is a very good thing. And it's good to have those relationships. Now, if I asked you, I sense that if I said, tell me about your day to day, you may have a very different day to day based on what day it is, and that may not match this Wednesday to last Wednesday and those before them. So how does your day usually go? Are you spending a lot of time in the office? Are you moving around a lot? How do you really spend your day?
I do spend a lot of time in the office. Um, because we're on a very large property and we have tenants, I do a lot of property management. I do have a facilities manager, but he is limited in what he does, and I have to take a pretty active role. So I deal a lot with tenants. I negotiate leases for our tenants. We lease our property. We do a lot of weddings and bar mitzvahs and parties. So that's a huge revenue source for us.
Sure.
So that takes a good portion of my time. Also, the building is 30 years old and buildings have wear and tear. So always dealing with those kinds of issues. I spend a lot of time doing HR management because we have a school and we have staff and we have to deal with all, with benefits and with payroll and with onboarding and offboarding. So that takes a good portion of my time. And membership. I spend a lot of time cultivating members. I spend a lot of time on the telephone talking to members, attending events, being public and having a face at all of the events. So, and then financial management, because you have to manage a tight budget. So I spend time doing that. And we've been very lucky that we've gotten two different security grants, one from the federal government and one from the state of California. And writing a grant is just a very small portion of receiving the funding for the grant, because governments,
Sure.
when they award you money, expect a high degree of follow through, documentation, due diligence. So I spent quite a lot of time dealing with grants. And then, like all other executive directors in this country, just managing the pandemic, managing the PPP loans and the ERTC credits and all of the government fundings that have been provided for us also takes a lot of time. So there's quite a lot of time spent in financial management. So you wear a lot of hats. You're a CFO, you're a property manager, you get in the weeds as much as you can. You're an HR manager. When you're a larger organization, you might have other people support you, but our synagogue has 400 family units, so we're not large enough to have a very large staff. So you have to wear a lot of different hats.
You touch on so many different things, and I can go in so many different directions with it, and I hope to in this conversation. But let's start with the fact you talked about events. Now, obviously, I mentioned before, life cycle events come throughout day to day within a synagogue. One day might be someone's bar mitzvah, and there might be a baby naming, and unfortunately a funeral, and then a wedding. And there's a lot of different uses for the rooms in the synagogue, and to utilize them wisely and to look at the synagogue as I'll go back to a catering hall in some ways, is very important to the livelihood of the synagogue, because the kind of revenue brings in and the kind of focus of having your celebration at the synagogue being part of community is really vital to the success of the synagogue.
That, but also in all synagogues, programming is very important, because let's face it, membership is a choice. And you want to make sure that you offer your members something worthwhile to them. So we have a very active programming committee, but we have to manage our programs within a budget. And we do amazing programs. We just had 250 people attend a Lag BaOmer event.
Very nice.
So, so we do lots of programs, Hanukkah and Purim and Yom HaZikaron, and they're just event after event, aside from Sukkot and the high holidays. And it's a very, very busy place. We always laugh about, we're going to find a time in the calendar where we can catch our breath. And we don't seem to find that time. We go from one thing to another in Jewish life, don't we?
I can appreciate that, because we're recording this in the middle of May, and I've already had 2 meetings in the last week to plan for the high holidays.
Exactly.
So it's all this has to happen on a regular basis, and you're watching the calendar And I guess we're fortunate that the Jewish calendar has a lot of different activity that's already programmed in. So you're not always having to create something, but you have to react, because as soon as Purim is over, here comes Pesach
Right,
roaring at you
right,
with seders and food shopping and lots of activity for the synagogue to provide.
right, right.
So that is very important. But you mentioned the grants, and there are some synagogues that are more successful in applying and receiving these grants than others. And especially in this day and age where you have issues with security, where there are a lot of different security grants available, it is extremely helpful to the additional costs that synagogues have had to bring on over the course of the last number of years to make sure that they are secure and safe, and everyone coming into the building is safe.
Right. We've been very lucky. We had no fencing in our property, and we're on a major street. And had our synagogue been built today opposed to 30 years ago, our sanctuary would not have been facing the major street, but it would have been set back with the parking lot in front of it. But that is not the case. So we needed fencing. It was really important. Our families were demanding it. It wasn't good enough that we had a guard at the front, because we were so vulnerable to penetration from so many different points. So we wrote a FEMA grant in 2000, I want to say 20, and we were very fortunate that we were awarded that grant. Then I wrote another grant for the state of California. It was a 200. The FEMA grant was 150. And we did get some fencing, but not enough for a 16-acre property. Then I wrote a grant for the state of California for 200,000. One of the things that was wonderful about California grant was they allowed us to take 50% of it and apply it to operations if we would bring in guards. Well, we already had guards, so we had an offset of $100,000 in our budget last year for guards. So that was a huge gift. However, they do not give you the money until you demonstrate that you've done the work. So the reporting that the government agencies have is a very, very laborious process. It takes a lot of work and a lot of time. So that's another place that I spend a good deal of my time, is in managing that. And then we've gotten some smaller grants from the Federation for Security. I just applied for another FEMA grant, and we'll see whether we get it. The more grants you get, the less likely it is that the government will grant you grants, because you lose points. So I don't want to be a chazer about it. We've been very lucky.
but you're very fortunate that you have received
Yeah.
the ones that you have, because it is key component. Because look, unfortunately, it's a challenging world out there, and it's gotten a little bit more challenging for synagogues with the rise in anti-Semitism, and just in general with keeping things secure. So having that fencing is very important, and it's great that you've been able to implement all this for your congregation.
Well, and I'll tell you something. It was one of the reasons we were able to open up an infant center, because parents were not going to bring their precious babies to our synagogue in an open campus. So the fact that we can demonstrate that we are a secure campus is really an important component to our success, and it's good for marketing also.
Yes, security is definitely a bullet point that people are looking for when it looks at the chart of opportunities when looking at a synagogue or any type of environment they're going to spend time in, especially with babies. You want to make sure that they're in a secure place. But having this focus on grants is, I think, going back to some of the other things you had to file for. And I'm really getting back to the point where you started your job in 2019, and this was a great, exciting opportunity for you to be executive director of a synagogue, one that you had a passion for, but even before getting hired. You didn't
Absolutely.
expect that in March of 2020, it'd be a very different job that you had applied for and interviewed for, and lots of different types of applications that you went through to make sure the synagogue was surviving during that time in 2020, when doors had to be shut and members really weren't allowed in to be a member.
Yeah, it was very difficult. We had to close our infant center. We had to, our early childhood center, we had to lay off all of our teachers. It was really heartbreaking, just heartbreaking. Parents didn't want their kids on Zoom for 4 hours a day, their 2 and 3-year-olds. That's not what they wanted. So we had to make different decisions. So that was really a hardship. It was also hard to navigate the waters with our community, because some people didn't understand the severity of the virus and didn't understand why we were closing our doors. They felt that they could still come to synagogue. They didn't like the idea of going on Zoom for services. We brought together several medical professionals in our community for a health task team that was really helpful to me in setting the parameters of when we would open and when we wouldn't. At one point, we did open up in June of 21, thinking it was over, and by the end of July, we were closed again, determining how we were going to have our services. We live in a very hot climate. It was 117 degrees the first year we closed and had high holiday services outdoors. So there were so many challenges that we had. We had to write disclaimers when we had events so that we didn't have any liability if people got sick. Really a lot of things to consider. And I'm not speaking for that. I don't believe I did anything different than any other executive director in the country. We had to be very nimble, and we had to pivot. And we had to pivot always with the thought of maintaining our membership, providing what we could to our members, even remotely, and maintaining, this sense that we were available to them. I mean, having to do Shiva on Zoom and not allowing members to come to their fellow congregants, funerals. I mean, there were some really heart-wrenching decisions we had to make.
Yeah, it was obviously a period of time that we're not going to forget. And in a leadership role, it became even harder to make sure you're looking out for so many different people at certain points, not knowing exactly what would happen if people were together, and then hearing reports of what did happen when people were together, and waiting for answers so you can become, because the biggest thing about being a congregation is being a community that's together. And
Right.
synagogues and other houses of worship around the country had to figure out, how can you be together when you can't be together?
Listen, I remember that first year when we had to ask people to provide a copy of their vaccination records before they could come in, even for outdoor services. I mean, I had people in our community just furious, like that's not welcoming. That's not a community. But we have had an obligation as leadership to keep people safe. We didn't want to become a super spreader over Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur.
Yes, I still remember the first year, 2020, where we had 15 people in the sanctuary for the second day of Rosh Hashanah, and everything else being live streamed. We just 3 days, I think it was the Shabbos before, we tested everything out, having a service with about 20 people in the sanctuary, and it was emotional. It was very hard for people to be sitting in a chair looking at a TV screen or computer screen in their house, and hard for us to look around and see nobody in the sanctuary doing Rosh Hashanah services.
Right. Listen, I think we all weathered it. We did well. I know for our community, we lost very few members, which I feel very grateful about. I mean, there were a handful that we lost. We lost the families of the kids from our school because they had to be members. So we lost those. But for the most part, we did relatively well under the circumstances, and now we're ready to build and to grow. And as I think I told you, we are just finishing up a merger with another synagogue down the block, and that offers just huge opportunities for us for growth and to reach those people in the Jewish community that are not currently affiliated, through programming and through offering different kinds of services and just being welcoming. So that's a great deal of where my efforts are being spent right now.
Well, it's a fantastic segue, but also really a tremendous amount of work to bring two communities together. I'm sure that you're dealing with a lot of excitement, a lot of promise, but also a lot of emotion and deep rooted history that people are having challenges with. But it does seem like you have a very big plan of where this is going to go to help grow not just the members of these two congregations, but farther than that, bring more people in with this merger.
That's what we hope. And one of the beauties about our two synagogues is neither of us had to do this. So these are conversations been going on for some time. This was not a result of COVID that we're doing this. We're doing it from a position of strength, where we're going to capitalize on the strengths of each community and come together as one, and really be a place in our neighborhood where we feel very confident people will want to join.
Now, how far are these communities and buildings from each other?
About a mile, a little under a mile and a half. And we've already combined our religious school and our youth programs. And we jointly opened up an infant program. So we have successes over the past couple of years of where it's worked well. And we're going to join our membership completely as of July 1st. Both our senior rabbis will remain.
Okay.
And yes, and that was very important to our communities, that they have their religious leaders, that they have very deep relationships with. Rabbi Vogel from Temple Aliyah has been the rabbi for 30 years there. Rabbi Kamras from Shomrei has been our rabbi for 24 years. So these are rabbis, and by the way, they get along really, really well. So it's a
Even better.
great partnership. Yeah. Yeah.
So this really is an exciting time for you, and quite an adventure moving forward of what your day-to-day is going to look like for the upcoming future.
Yes, it's very exciting. Very exciting.
Now, looking back at the 4 years that you've been in this role, and you mentioned that you give the conversation with your staff of how you want this work environment to be fun. What has been the most fun for you? What is the things that you look forward to enjoy most on day-to-day, week-to-week with your experience?
Well, as I said, I'm a people person. So the interactions I have with our community is wonderful. The relationships I've forged with our professional staff, they're like family. They're people that I care deeply about. So that's really, really fun for me. I really like the financial piece of it. I really feel like it's putting a puzzle together. And I really like that. I've really enjoyed doing the grants. It's taken a lot of time, but it's extraordinarily fulfilling knowing that we can bring that kind of revenue into the synagogue and make those kinds of changes. I just love going to work every day.
And that's a great feeling for you, and great for your congregation to know how much you really enjoy what you're doing. If someone was to kind of wonder and think about the things that you do on a daily basis, or may come up over the course of the week, what would most surprise them of issues that you are dealing with, or an experience that you've dealt with that really would either put a smile on their face or a real shock on their face?
I don't think people understand the extent to which I have to be involved in the operations. We had a huge Mahjong tournament about 3 weeks ago, and I got a phone call from a volunteer that the toilets overflowed. And we had a maintenance guy there, but he was a maintenance guy. He didn't know what to do. Or the alarm goes off in the middle of the night, or the steps, going up to the second floor broke, or, they're just operationally. We had terrible torrential rains this year. We had 10 inches of rain in one day.
You did.
And the roof collapsed in our school building. And just the kinds of things that you have to deal with that are not, it's not on your calendar, right? You come to work in the morning and you have X number of things that you're planning on doing, and a wrench gets thrown into it because operationally you just have to stop what you're doing and address these problems. And that's been the hardest part of my job.
And that's definitely not fun, having to run in and deal with an alarm in the middle of the night, or I guess there's a trade-off between whether you've been asleep and alarm goes off and having to deal with the toilets in
Right.
an emergency situation, which is worse in that situation. But it probably is true that people do not even think about that. These are some of the things that you have to deal with. You really are on call 24/7 in many ways, and hopefully you do have the time to yourself that you can you can kind of recharge your batteries over the course of the week, because the building is open for the most part 7 days a week. You have a lot of activity with services. You have a lot of activity with programming and school programs and evening programs, evening meetings. it is quite a schedule that you work on a weekly basis.
You have to be in 100%. You really do. It's a very challenging job, and you have to be willing to put in a lot of hours.
But it's definitely hours that are worthwhile and very meaningful, considering your enjoyment of people and how much you get to do for them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes.
Well, this really is, for one, your story is fantastic, and the things you've gone through, the 4 years of being executive director with COVID, and now a merger, and obviously let's throw in you slipped in a roof caving into it with the water. That is a lot of activity for someone for their entire career, but this is just a 4-year segment of your role there at the synagogue. So it really is incredible the things that you have accomplished and been able to manage for the congregation, but really for you coming on here and sharing this with us, and telling us really how you're keeping the shul lights on, and and the plumbing and the roof over their heads,
Only the
and
shul
and
lights on,
really
right?
really great programming, so that really is a vital and large community that you are managing.
Well, I'm thrilled to have the conversation with you, and I just think it's just such a gratifying job. Uh, that it's very time consuming, but I think equal to the time you invest is the reward you receive.
Oh, very well said, and really poignant in everything that you have going on and what you have coming up. I think that's an exciting story that obviously is yet to be written, but will really write chapters for years to come in the growth of the community. So, Sheila, thank you so much for joining us and sharing all this with us today.
Well, thank you for having me on. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
And thank you all for joining us as well. This is really an amazing story of really everything that she does on a daily basis. Sheila wears a lot of hats. I know people say that is a cliche comment, but it really is true because of all the different responsibilities that she has as an executive director. Now, add to that, obviously COVID issues, but also adds that merging two congregations into one that have deep histories and deep connections with each other is a challenge in itself, but really is something that she is moving forward with rolled up sleeves and lots of excitement that will bring real growth to that community. And that's really what this conversation is about, and what we want to see: growth in the Jewish community, and make sure that continues for generations to come. So thank you for joining us on this conversation and this journey. Go out, have a great rest of today, and we will see you next time.